Good afternoon, everyone. And I would first of all like to thank Directorate of Archaeology and Museums in Maharashtra and KJ Somaya Institute of Dharma Studies for organizing this wonderful event. And it is really unfortunate that I cannot be there in person as I'm traveling right now. But I thank the organizers for facilitating the recording of my session so that I can reach you in this way. So thank you, all of you. And now I would like to start my presentation. So whenever we talk about heritage, say in Maharashtra or even in India, we do not quickly think about the industrial heritage or the corporate heritage or even the institutional heritage as such. And it is really very important to like revisit these definitions because what has happened in last 40 and 50 years, if it does not get recorded right now or documented, if we are not documenting it right now, soon this memory would be faded and then we would be suffering from the amnesia for last for whatever had happened in the last 30, 40 years. And therefore it is really imperative for every institution, every organization in our country to think about preserving their own heritage. And today I would like to present a case study of Godrej, but before that, let me start some of my personal experiences as such. So whenever we see this building, means we all are familiar, especially those who are staying in Mumbai, are familiar with this Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj terminus. And whenever we see this building, it really like we feel proud about it. We are, we always like take a picture on our mobiles whenever we actually cross that. And this is also the UNESCO heritage now. So this is an impressive building, and there is no doubt that, we would pay attention to these kind of impressive buildings. And even a common man would understand that this is a heritage because of the style, because of, in which year that has been established. But when we actually look at these buildings, which we usually cross, while traveling in our city, uh, we never thought that, this can also be heritage because we sometimes feel that it has to be monumental, it has to be really aesthetically pleasant to be a heritage. So this is actually just the common notions that we sometimes really have about the heritage. But when you look at these kind of like normal looking buildings, may not be like always aesthetically pleasing. Lot of industrial structures, lot of textile mills that we see now, we cross that every day, but we never really thought about, that this has to be really not necessarily always preserved, but at least somewhere it has to be documented that these kind of structures are always there. And then, means I grew up in Prabhadevi area, and I had seen actually, a lot of changes that are happening because when I was a kid, I used to hear a siren because there was a standard meals close by. But now, if you see, this kind of on the left hand side photo, this triangular shaped building, this is actually on the lands of the standard mills. It's not that, that we really don't have to preserve every heritage in its original structure, but we have to think that can we really preserve these memories. Or for example, on the right hand side, the building that you see in front is actually the Hind cycle. And there used to be like which was manufacturing cycles at one point in time. And it has a lot of interesting art deco elements in it, and this is actually really hidden kind of a gem. And nobody has now, because Hinda cycles are Ganpati was really very popular in that area when I was growing up. But now everything is giving away to the real estate, and that's, I think, something which is inevitable. But if all these things that are disappearing, if we can at least have a kind of a plaque, a kind of at least information that this used to be there, I think these kind of things we really need to really now think about and look at, when we are talking about heritage. Or even these kind of buildings, like this building used to be the Came Company. We all know the Came's Corner, but this building used to be the office of the Came Company. And, and there used to be where you can see the VIP logo. That used to be one interesting factory outlet of Blowplast company and the Leo toys that they used to make. And for a kid growing up in 80s, this factory outlet of Leo toys was really very important. But And this has something to do with the childhood memory. So if somebody is really writing the history of childhood, these would be really very interesting things to really like look at area wise and document that these used to be these kind of factory outlets were there in these areas, which would soon disappear, and they would like change the meaning. Now of course there are like a lot of residential complex around, but and there are like a lot of new people now residing in these areas who may not be even aware of what really this area was all about, and how this is like changing and evolving over a period of time. Now we really need to think about whether we call this our history, what is a definition of history, what we consider historical, what we consider to be heritage. I think even the popular history, public history really needs to be looked at now. And these kind of industrial structures, these kind of companies who have like contributed in shaping the industrial past of our nation, I think needs to be really preserved. So because the memory is really very fleeting in a sense, and memory will be will keep being replaced, and that's a hard fact, and we can't really like shy away from that. But when these are like fading away, at least if we can create certain kind of uh, you know places or spaces where these memories can be cherished in a way, we really need to think about that. And because of the constant industrialization, deindustrialization, we need to keep tracking all the changes that are happening in our cities, our neighborhoods, and how we can preserve this public memory is something that we need to talk about when we are thinking about heritage. Because heritage is not just about these structures or keeping these structures, but also the memories that are associated with these kind of building structures. And so for example, the mills were actually quite a great industrial heritage. And it's a hard fact that we have to accept that it there will be the new changes will happen, but can we have like a small space dedicated to the memory of the mill land, or like textile history of Mumbai somewhere, wherever the malls are standing, at least in one corner, if we can have that, so that the new people who are coming in, the new generation, is aware that what was there before. This is just one thought that I had before I would talk to you about the Godrej case study. So but I also understand that when I talk about institutions should come up and preserve their history, organizations should come forward and do this kind of things, I also realize that why there is this loss of industrial memory. One is basically there is an indifference on part of the organizations as well, because they are not really looking at preserving their history. Some institutions think that we are just 50-year old, why there is a need to do that, and then people really keep thinking about that, when we will achieve a milestone, then only we will preserve the history. But I think there is a constant change happening today, and we need to really start thinking about how we can at least document these changes, if not like preserving the actual structures. And then, of course, there are some institutions which also have budget constraints, and I really understand, because documenting, preserving, keeping records, archiving, everything really needs a budget. And then, of course, the changing technologies have really, have also led to the loss of memory, because there were devices which were preserving memory, like videotapes are like no more functional. Then there are also challenges of the digital world, that because now everything is on WhatsApp, but there is no process of where we can actually archive these memories. There is no dedicated institutions where people can share their memories, or send their records to. And therefore there are like all these kind of things. And then of course, whenever the organizations are changing, there is always a loss of records and loss of memory. And we really do not pay much attention to also our documentary heritage, because there is so much is there in the records, and especially post independence. Because I was reading the preface of Dr. Ramchandra Guha's India After Gandhi, where he says that for Indians, somehow history stops at 15th August 1947. And this is actually a hard fact because after 1947, there are not many institutions which have preserved their archival resources. And therefore, it is really very much that we actually think about that how every institution can preserve their records, and future historians then can actually go through these records, because these are also our documentary heritage, and a lot of things are already recorded in those documents. So it is really a responsibility, our responsibility, to really have a plan, to actually make institutions preserve their records, and also send it, if they don't have their own sources, even the government departments should send it to the state archives. And So archiving is basically, is really very essential when it comes to preserving the heritage, because archiving makes you, recover this memory, discover something new about our past, because every record has some interesting thing to tell. And so the business archives that I would be talking about is the Godrej archives, and I would actually use the Godrej story to see that how every institution, if they are preserving their records, can actually contribute to map the history of our entire continent. Because the organizations do not really work in vacuum, and their histories are connected with each other. And therefore, if every institution starts, so archives really help in recovering and discovering about the past. And so what I will do today is, I'll quickly tell you about one, our archives, and how we are actually, preserving the present, also the past, the industrial past of the Godrej. So Godrej archives actually was thought about in the year 1997, when Godrej Voice was, celebrating its centenary. And obviously, at that time, the chairman, Sorab Godrej, he actually thought that, this is the right time to look back upon and, try and learn from the history. And therefore, he thought that, Godrej also should start an archive, so that, whatever Godrej had contributed to the industrial past can be preserved. He also wanted to preserve the memories of people who have contributed to the success and have made it possible for Godrej to be a household name. And however, after the centenary, they were thinking about and planning about this. And Archives was formally started in the year 2006. And this is the department which is regularly and is collecting, documenting, and preserving the history of Godrej. So it has a dedicated team which is continuously after preserving not just the past but also the present. So whatever happens in the organization, and whatever the contribution, whatever the changes that are happening. Archives actually tries to record it, interpret it, and then also make it accessible for the researchers and the visitors, whoever is interested in understanding this organizational knowledge that Godrej Archives is preserving about the Godrej company. For this, actually, what we do is like we have a proper process, and every institution, whoever is interested in setting up the archives of, for preserving their own heritage, actually should follow all these processes, whereby, identifying the documents, identifying the records which are really historically important within the organization. We also do surveys of records at different departments, different businesses, if there are any historically important records. And if we identify that, okay, this is really of a historical importance, it should go to the archives. And then the records are transferred to the archives. We also, as I was saying, that we are also chronicling and preserving the present, because whatever is happening, even 2 months back is already a history. And before it disappears, if we can document it when it is fresh, I think it becomes easier for an archivist, so that after 10 years you don't have to search for all those details again. And therefore there is a dedicated person in the team which actually keeps tracking whatever is happening within the organization, and if we can get the right kind of records. uh, we also realize that not just the documentary heritage is important, but also there are so many people who have contributed to the success of organization, and oral histories of these people can also add as a source for the future history of the company, because not everything would be recorded in a file, and every people have like internalized lot of knowledge while working in the company, and they can be a great source for understanding how the company has evolved over a period of time. So we also have started the oral history project right from the year 2006, and we have so far interviewed almost more than 300 people in the organization. Uh, and then once all these records come to the archives, there is a proper process for cataloging, there is proper process for storing these records, and of course the care and conservation care has to be taken of these records. So we also have a dedicated team to conserve and digitize these resources so that we can make it accessible and make it available for people who can come, because all this preservation of heritage would be meaningless if it is not accessible for people. And therefore we uh, try and make it accessible for as many researchers as possible, so that there are like multiple histories can come out of what we are preserving at the organization. But today what I will be doing is I will just take an example of one product, and that while studying the history of that one product, how we actually realize that even if like Godrej was manufacturing this product called typewriter, how actually it is really connected with lot of stories of individuals in the city of Mumbai as well as in India. I would like to present that case study for you. The uh, uh, how actually we have realized that how histories are really connected. So in the year 2009, Godrej and Boys decided to close the factory which was manufacturing typewriters, because the demand was actually dwindling, and there was no takers actually. Only few export orders were there, and it was a very difficult decision because this was a very kind of a important product for the company, because for the first time Indian company had manufactured the typewriter, and Godrej introduced the typewriter in 1955. So obviously it was very difficult decision, but then because there was no demand for typewriters, they had to decide that they have to close down this factory. So immediately the archives were informed that we are closing down the factory. Why don't you come and see it? So we rushed there, uh, and we actually documented all the machinery that was lying there, even the spare parts, how actually the whole process of manufacturing typewriter was. So this was actually in Shirwal, Pune, Maharashtra, and we went there to document it. And then we really realized, that some of these machines are really very important. Those were actually built in house by Godrej. And also the last typewriter was an Arabic typewriter, so the carriage movement was also in the reverse order, and the last typewriter actually was sent to the archives as well. So this was actually a very conscious decision that now that we are stopping this particular product, how we should be documenting it, and how that last typewriter should go to the archives. So this is actually the consciousness that is really very required in every institutions. Even though it's like the scale of the institution doesn't matter, even if it's a small institution or a larger organization such as Godrej, I think everybody has a role to play. And I think one must consciously see that if something is like closing down, if something is changing, can do we have a process of tapping that, and do we have a process for documenting it? So even these machines started actually speaking to us, and some of them were actually made, as I was saying already, in house by Godrej tooling. So this was actually the last batch of typewriters was lying there when we actually went to the factory, and these were all Arabic typewriters, as I was saying. And then, of course, we also tried, making one installation, which is now on our campus, using this last batch of typewriters, which was going nowhere otherwise. But uh, but then we also really like realized that there is a bigger story to say, because and then we actually started looking through our records, And then we actually found, these kind of records, like, when the typewriter was introduced in the year 1955. And this ad is actually from the magazine Industrial India. And these are again very fabulous magazines, which we actually found in one of our surveys. These are from 50s and 60s, and they really tell you the industrial history of India in those 2 decades, which is again one fascinating era as such. And for Godrej, it was for the first time Indian company like Godrej was manufacturing typewriters. So obviously, if you can see even on the ad, Godrej was proudly saying that, we present the all Indian typewriter. And so obviously, one has to really reimagine that era, that why this was really very important, because there was a whole, and from these Industrial India magazine and Engineering India magazines, we came to know that there were lots of industrial exhibitions happening, because, we were actually newly independent nation. We had to develop our industries, and there were a lot of exhibitions, and one of the exhibition also had a tagline, India can make it. And if you see here, actually, the second photograph where Dr. Rajendra Prasad is looking at the typewriter, and here you can see actually the line is there. I don't know whether you are able to read that, but it says India can make it, because that was the slogan that was used for that exhibition, which was the industrial fair. And so this is how actually the typewriter really entered the government offices. And this is really very interesting story, because if you see Nehru typing on the typewriter, because this is just before the launch of the Godrej typewriter, when actually one of the branch manager came to know that Nehru is doing one Congress session in Awadhi, and I must show the Indian typewriter to him. So he actually rushed with the typewriter, showed him, and he also tried his hands on that typewriter. So this is that picture that we had. Rajendra Prasad had already spoken about. The third picture is MC Chagla, the first Chief Justice of India. He was also presented with the Indian typewriter, and then of course we have even the. So how actually this product becomes a kind of a lifeline of all the offices, because this was the only instrument that could actually produce records then. Now we have computers, of course, but then it is really very interesting history, because then we actually started going through even the records at the Maharashtra State Archives. And if you see like the 1894 record from the General Department files, it actually spoke about introduction of typewriters in government offices. So there is a bigger story that we saw when we actually started searching for that in 1894 their typewriters were for the first time introduced in the government offices. So, and there was a creation of a post of typist for the first time. So all these records are really very important, because they are telling you something about the nation, about the office spaces, how actually the modern office spaces actually emerge. So there are so many stories involved in it, and therefore then we thought that we need to do a book on the Indian history of typewriters. And that's what we actually thought about. So these were the photographs that we started collecting about the how the factory looked like earlier. And this is actually the test typing department on the left hand side that you see. This is a manufacturing unit in Vikhroli then, which was producing typewriters before it moved to Shirwal, of course. So these were the photographs we actually also started collecting. And then we also ended up acquiring one of the very important photographs collection, not just for the typewriters, but we came to know that Mittar Bedi, who was the industrial photographer of 70s, he was a very renowned photographer then. And his studio is actually just behind the Taj Hotel in Mumbai. So again, these spaces are also very important, not just the company, but the ad agencies, the photographers, the engineering colleges, they are all contributing to the industrial heritage of our nation and industrial past of our nation. So we actually just went to check in his studios whether they have some of these old photographs, and we were really surprised to see that they have maintained a lot of negatives of his work, and we could acquire some around like 1400 negatives from that collection. And there was such lovely negatives of the typewriter manufacturing that was done in 70s, engineers designing the typewriter. And then you can see even the office spaces with So we also actually came to know that there was an industrial photographer, a renowned industrial photographer, Mr. Mittar Bedi, and his studio was there behind the Taj Hotel. And we thought that, because he had actually photographed for the HTA, which was the agency working closely with Godrej then, and he had photographed a lot of manufacturing plants in Godrej in 1970s. So we went there in the studio, and to our surprise, they had actually really maintained very well all the negatives of his work that he has ever produced. And we could actually see that there are some 1400 negatives which were like lying around, which were on Godrej. And we were able to actually acquire this, because it is really important that even all these kind of institutions may have so much to offer about our industrial heritage. And we found all these things, and these are some of the things that we have got on the typewriter. And of course, there are also other manufacturing plants of Godrej that we could get information about from these photographs. So you could see the manufacturing processes, you could see engineers discussing about the drawings. You can also see the offices where ultimately the typewriters were used, where the Godrej chairs, Godrej table are also quite visible. And then we also like started talking to a lot of engineers who had worked on the typewriter. And then to our surprise, one of the engineer who was also a plant manager, he actually showed us this diary that he had maintained when he was sent to Germany for his training in typewriter. And if you could see, because this is my favorite page, because this is actually how the Devanagari has to be designed on the typeface. So there is an engineering history also involved here. And how the Devanagari and the language typewriters came into being is another history in itself. And therefore, we also have like a lot of documents related to standardization of language typewriters. And Godrej also was part of a lot of committees that the government of India had constituted to, really design the regional language typewriters as such. And then we also realized that there are a lot of other people who were associated with the typewriter business. There were typewriter mechanics, there was typing classes, there was training courses in the, at the Asha Commercial Institute, or here, sales and repair services. So there is a whole ecosystem for just one product. And there are like so many that we could actually see and document. And even if you see the history of typefaces, you can actually really see very interesting, logos that you could see over here. We also realized that there is also, the carbon paper, which was really essential for the typewriter. So the manufacturers of them, there are ribbons were needed. So manufacturers of that, and also the spare part dealers and the kind of furniture they had. So there is such a great ecosystem. And, with one product, and we could document all those people as well. And then, of course, a lot of typing institutes that you can still see over here, like Kalba Devi Typewriting Institution, this majestic shorthand, and these are all from the area of Girgaon and Kalba Devi. And we could actually document that through our book. So there is so much that the city and the state offers as far as the histories of people is concerned. And I would like to just play this video to show that how people's histories also matter. I'm just playing this video. Yeah. So here is one film that we made using these oral histories, which actually tell you how important the people's history is also in any industrial heritage as well.
Mentally locating the keys and pressing them with a particular finger for which it has to work. That is a specialty of typewriting. Hello, I'm Ashok Abhyankar, proprietor of the Abhyankar Short and Typing Institute. We are running this institute for last 84 years and this is the third generation going on. We have 45 machines and 250 students. You get a sound, you get a feel of touch to the keyboard, and you also get a bounce that machine that gives you. It's a pleasure. That pleasure you can't get it on a keyboard. I met Sachin, I met Gavaskar, I met Lata Mangeshkar. My father told me, Chandrakant, unless you try to do something what you have already mastered, you will never improve. Once boss told me to type intercom list. So instead of typing that list in the usual manner, I type in the form of telephone.
And that clicked me. At that time, I thought I'll become artist through this medium. Before taking VRS, 1 day in advance, I met our chairman. And I told them, sir, I wanted to purchase this typewriter, but our administration department, they said it is not possible to sell you typewriter. So he was chief guest for my farewell. Then he said, "Okay, we are allowing Chandrakant to purchase typewriter for 1 rupee. So they actually gifted me this typewriter. And that typewriter is Halda typewriter. And now it's a family member of my, in our house.
62 साली माझं लग्न झालं. त्याच्यानंतर माझा टायपरायटरशी संबंध आला. जन्मभरात मेहनतही खूप माझे मिस्टर करत होते. मी माझ्याकडनं होईल तेवढी त्यांना साथ देत होते. तर सुरुवातीला आम्ही सुद्धा थोडंसं सर्व्हिसिंग वगैरे सुरुवात करून हळूहळू सेल परचेस वगैरे करून धंद्याचं पाय रोवलं. खूप माणसं आम्हाला गिरायक चांगली भेटली. आमच्याकडे किती जण मिरजेचे, सांगलीचे, इचलकरंजीचे, जळगावचे, वलसाडचे असे बाहेरगावचे बरेच लोक आमच्याकडे येत असत. टायपरायटरचं म्हणजे कसे टाईप बार कधी सोडवून ठेवलेले असेल तर कधी ते धुवून ठेव म्हणून सांगायचे. कधी प्लेटिंगचे पार्ट काढलेले असायचे, तुम्ही प्लेटिंगला नेऊन टाकायची, आणायची. पेंटिंगला मशीन द्यायचं असायचं. शिवण शिवत असे, मुलांचे अभ्यास मीच घ्यायची, सगळं घरात पण मीच करायचे, आलं गेलं मीच करायचे. ते कसं मी सगळं एवढं मॅनेज करू, ते हा मला आता प्रश्न पडतो.
So basically, when we talk about heritage, it is not just the monumental structures that we talk about, but it is about the places. For the business history, even the products matter, even the processes, that how they have changed over a period of time, and most importantly, people, how they are part of this heritage. So that's why all these stories are really very important when we are talking about heritage. So if you look at a place, for Godrej archives, where actually, Godrej started in the year 1897. We also started documenting the history of that place, which is in Lal Bagh. So all the old pictures from 1920s, we started, getting from the old Bombay books. We also actually have actually documented how the place was by photographing it. And then we also came across huge pile of records over there. And if these were actually some of the disposed of records, but when we actually started going through, we really found very interesting things, like how different products were introduced, how they were improved, or even like what trees were planted in Vikhroli. As you can see over here, a blueprint which actually shows how the Ashoka Tree Avenue was created in Vikhroli Industrial Township of Godrej and Boys. So all these things are really very important to look at. So what you are throwing away can also be really very historical. And then also how actually the places were built, through the photographs we tried and captured it, or even these kind of letters that the gardeners have written about how the lawns have to be created in this industrial township, what kind of plants to be planted. So all these are really very important resources of history, of understanding the place or a business or organization as well. Coming to the product, I have already narrated about the typewriter, so I won't go into details. But this is one product, and these are the records that we found at Lal Bagh. And this is the ballot box that was, manufactured by Godrej and Boys for the, elections, the first elections of independent India. Now, this is really like, one factory in Mumbai producing certain things, but the history is actually quite a larger thing. Like, there is a first election is happening, and this is the way the company is contributing. Or even, these kind of drawings about the internal locking mechanism that was a patented invention by one of the workers, Nathalal Panchal. Or even the advertisements are very important source of heritage. Or even these kind of photographs, drawings about the products, because this is also telling you about how the office spaces were there. So the history of office spaces, even these kind of tables you will still see in the government offices, even these chairs you might find in government offices. So these are the things which we need to record to understand how ordinary people were leading their lives, how the office spaces were building up. Or even these kind of products that actually define the middle class homes, like Storewell, the Godrej steel cupboards, and the Godrej refrigerator. So all these things, together actually really create an interesting heritage and interesting stories needed to be told. And then, of course, there are processes which we also try to tap. For example, when the partition took place in the year 1947, we thought that how that might have impacted the company. And then we found this circular, and there is just one line, as you can read over here on the left. The inscription "Made in India" should be marked on each and every package exported to Karachi. Now, this was a significant change because earlier Godrej and Boyce had a dealer in Karachi when it was one nation. And now, suddenly, because of the partition, now we have to stamp it "Made in India." So these are the little things that your organization might have, but they are linked to the larger narratives and the larger histories. Or, for example, these kind of processes, simple processes that informing that the financial year is now changed from calendar year to fiscal year. But this is so important because suddenly you will see how actually a historian reads into it is now traditionally managed company is getting transferred into a professionally managed company. So there is so much that these records can also offer, the how the leave records were kept, how the workers actually punched their cards earlier, how actually the factories were built, or even these kind of stories of how actually a lot of technologies were made in-house when the client was like ISRO. And then these are the oral histories of like one of the technology called expander that was actually made at Godrej and Boyce in 1/5 of the cost that US was offering for, uh, because there was like a vision, there was also like a willingness to experiment, and ISRO also put the trust in the Indian industries that we can actually build all these things in house. So these are the stories of not just one organization, but they are connected with this kind of a larger story of how India was progressing in space arena. And then, as I was saying, the people are really very important. You have already heard few people talking about how their lives were connected with the typewriter. But then you also have these kind of stories. When the computers were introduced in the offices, what was the reaction of people? How these computers really looked like, and how very minimum kind of a space that they were offering. So how really the challenges were of the office spaces in 70s. This is very interesting thing to know about. Or even these stories of the customers. Now this is actually they are talking about the product, but they are also telling you stories. For example, this is the Storwell that was bought in 1930s, and this actually, when the Khadakwasla, dam was like burst, and then there was a lot of flood in Pune. This cupboard was submerged, but then it somehow survived, and then it was transferred to the Godrej archives in 2019 by this family in Pune. Or even this refrigerator, when this came to archives, there is a story. The Dr. Weingankar used to keep medicines in this refrigerator, which was otherwise not made for that. But now in COVID, during the COVID era, when Godrej was manufacturing, storage, the refrigerators for the vaccine, you can actually see, how there are so many kind of links that you can actually find in history. And then this is one story from again the Maharashtra, which is actually from the village near Pune, which is called Padalewadi. And these Nauganis are almost like the fourth generation is working with Godrej and Boyce. And this black and white picture is actually the first batch that came to Mumbai, because there was not, like the agriculture was depending on the rainfall. So how this community, started coming to Mumbai in search of livelihood, and they started working with the companies. And these Navganis were actually basically the loaders who actually shift the products, heavy products, from one place to the another, using very basic things like wooden blocks and ropes. But these are the stories are very important because otherwise they are not recorded. So through the oral histories, we tried recording even their migration stories as well. And we also like did a little installation where we invited them to see that film, and this is available on the YouTube as well, and you can see it. And it's called On the Move. You can go to our Godrej Archives YouTube channel and see this film. But these are like stories of the communities are also linked with the organization, and one needs to document these as well. And preserving the heritage is really very important, and this is just one picture of our Godrej archives. And that's actually, on that note, I would really like to end is basically when we are thinking about heritage, when we are actually planning a roadmap ahead, we must understand that it is not just the tangible structures that are necessary, but even these kind of memories needs to be really taken into consideration. And if we cannot really like sometimes preserve these structures, but at least somewhere if we can at least have preserve that memory through documentation, I think that would be a really great contribution in mapping Maharashtra's heritage. So I would like to end here. And I would like to also say that we must need to actually reimagine the history. And history doesn't have to be always a dead subject, but how actually history can actually be really sprinkled in the spaces that we are living today in different forms. Like you can see here in the modern office spaces also, how we have tried to incorporate some of the historical material. Like here you can see old picture of the typewriter thing. You can see the old Godrej chairs given a new look. So all these things we have to really reimagine how, when we talk about heritage, it is not just about preserving a structure, but you can preserve it in all these kind of ways, in a subtle ways, whereby people can keep remembering these things as such. And therefore, this is, what we must understand, that we need a policy where we can actually have, think about how actually all these kind of resources, documentary heritage needs to be really preserved, how we can engage in these kind of meaningful ways whereby people are aware about what really heritage is all about. So that's all from me, and thank you for giving me this time. And of course, I won't be able to take questions, but please write to us if you're like really are interested in knowing anything about the Godrej archives. Thank you.